Let's hear Swivel from the song Cycle Outtake. Now, this one was fun for me because we were talking about the idea of the quintuplets and all the septuplets and all these different kind of notational, for lack of a better context, it's Brian Ferneyhough kind of sensibility. But like in this piece, we see that, right, or we hear that, but it's against like the metronomical clock.
Yeah,
that we are all used to, right? From just like everyday life.
Yeah, it's nowhere near Ferneyhough, but yeah, there is an occasional tuplet, and yeah, we were saying that. I do love a tuplet, but yeah, in that piece, it was really fun to have the tuplets sort of projected against something very metronomic, which is, often when I'm writing a song, or really when I'm writing anything, the idea of a conceit is very important to me, that there's some sort of I guess another word would be like a gimmick, but there's some sort of like a compositional idea that maybe is like a kind of a restriction, or a rule, or just something that relates to the text, and then, I don't know, sort of binds the music in some way to an idea that then I have to sort of play with. And so in Swivel, so every song in this cycle is based on a photograph, a selfie. And this selfie is by Félix Nédard, who was a eccentric French inventor. And this is from the late 19th century. And the photograph it's called Revolving Self-Portrait. And he's sitting on a swivel chair, which is where swivel comes from.
Oh, okay.
Yeah, and he's timed it so that he takes a picture looking straight ahead, and then he takes a picture at, basically, 6 o'clock, and then 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, all the way around. So you see, all the way to the back of his head and then front again, so that if you played the 12 pictures as a kind of a film, you would see him rotating. And that's actually how that was. It's a kind of a film, actually. And that's how it was originally presented, was 12 stills that were rotating, so that you actually see him turn all the way around. So, and Royce's, my lyricist, Royce Vavrek, was really wonderfully riffing on this idea of time, because he had the time, that he's setting off the camera at every angle, but that every angle is also mapped onto a kind of a clock. So it's like he's like looking straight ahead, which would be like, I don't know, 6 o'clock, 7 o'clock, 8 o'clock, 9 o'clock. 12 o'clock is all head all the way backwards. And so I was already thinking that this song needs to be about time and something that's metronomic. And so it's quarter note equals 60, and the piano, every single quarter note gets an articulation. So it's as though you're hearing like a clock, da, 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 da.
Yeah, but how did you figure out how to not make it sound so square? Because it doesn't sound square. That's the hard part.
Well, that's where the conceit. Yeah, I have to play with that. I mean, I have to. Yeah, once I set the kind of rule, then I have to find a way to make the music feel free and imaginative, but still bound to the conceit. And so I never break the conceit.
No.
Yeah, every single quarter note beat at Q equals 60 is marked, but then the voice is, I mean, it's also precisely notated, but it sounds much freer against that because it's all these kind of tuplets and sounds more parlando. It's just like someone talking, so that there's this nice tension between the piano's metronomic articulation of every second, basically, and then the voice sounding much freer against that. I mean, that was a conceit specific to that song because it, again, sort of was about time and clock and rotation. But actually, it's something that I find I'm doing a lot in my music these days. That the sense of freedom and the kind of rubato of a tuplet in the Chopin sense, where you have these incredible, it's like 17 notes in the time of like 8 or something. But it's really, I mean, that's not like a metronomic tuplet. That's a kind of like find a way to fit these notes into the measure or into the beat. But in Chopin, I mean, it's against usually like a left hand that is more metronomic. So you have this beautiful kind of interplay between a free line and something that's more rigid, and that's like a tension between the left and right hand in Chopin. And my version of that is often that it's a tension between different layers of the music, that something is more articulated, more sort of beat driven, more metrical, and then against that you have like longer lines that sound much freer. That's something that I'm thinking a lot about.
Yeah, but not only that, the harmony changes a lot too. Mm-hmm. So like this excerpt that we played, it actually starts with a bunch of clusters doing this tick-tock kind of thing. But in the beginning of the excerpt, actually was all single notes, mm-hmm. just doing this, I think it was minor seconds going up and down. So, but I didn't even like notice actually, like listening to it. I'm a composer. I mean, I should be noticing the thing, but I didn't really notice it until looking at the score. Like, oh, wait a second. He started the thing with just single notes, but like I'm halfway through and he like found a way to make these single notes into clusters, mm-hmm. and it doesn't really, it didn't like irk my ear that mm-hmm. I was hearing clusters in the background. Mm-hmm. And because you set us up with these minor seconds that mm-hmm. are like intrinsically mm-hmm. dissonant intervals. Mm-hmm.
Yeah, again, that's the trying to find the freedom or the variety of the imagination within the rigidity of the conceit. That's something again like unique to that song, but it's the idea of conceit is very important to me. Do you work with those? I mean, in your music?
Oh, I mean, I just finished a piece where it was literally all about that.
Okay.
Like my piece that I just heard last week with the
LA Phil piece.
The LA Phil.
Okay.
It's all about heartbeats and breathing. And I mean, like the most basic thing that you could think of. I'm down that same path, but sometimes I don't do that. But I feel like a piece with an audience, a large audience, you sort of have to do that. Otherwise, you can't do all the crazy things that you like to do in a piece.
Yeah.
So I think that you and I think the same way because you're doing all the things that you like, mm-hmm. all the rhythmic stuff, all mm-hmm. the harmonic things, mm-hmm. The text that you're choosing, but mm-hmm. you're like packaging it in a way where somebody can like kind of get what you're after mm-hmm. from the first listening. I think that's important. I mean, personally for me, it will only get better after more listenings. I don't think it will get worse.
Yeah. I think I've like had like shifting views on that, on I guess like the communicative content of music. And yeah, I mean, different composers have different views on that, different styles. It's it really depends on the music and on the piece, and even a composer. I mean, something like late Beethoven. The Ninth Symphony is like, that is like a communicative piece. That is a piece that's like, it's very bold font all the time, and and the thematics and the journey from minor to major, and the sort of the use of text, and like it enacts its thematic, this thing about brotherhood and the Schiller poem. It's like, and then we have this chorus, and the chorus comes back in, and they're singing all together. It's like the medium is the message, in some sense, in that piece of Beethoven. And then simultaneously you have all these strange things like the late piano sonatas, or the late string quartets, and those are like, that's a very different kind of communicative music making. It's much more Gnostic and interior and strange and baffling. And I still don't know what to make of many of those pieces, like the late sonatas or the late string quartets. They're challenging, and they don't necessarily reveal their secrets. And it's incredible to think that these pieces are sort of like were made in the same general, time frame and by the same person. So I find that it depends on the piece for me, how much I'm thinking about this idea of communication. It depends on the scale of the piece. If you're writing a piece for orchestra, and it's going to be like, it's going to be a large hall and a large audience, like that's a very different piece than something that's, I don't know, intimate, or like just voice and piano, or going to be performed in a smaller space. So, I mean, I'm sure that's something that you think about as well, like whether writing for the LA Phil versus writing for, I don't know, Jack Quartet, like those are...
Oh yeah, they're completely different pieces. Yeah, they have to be.
Yeah.
And the musicians are different as well.
Yeah, exactly.
I had actually, speaking of like a new music ensemble, I had a violist from International Contemporary Ensemble who was subbing in for the LA Phil. And she was like telling me that, a lot of the musicians didn't really care to play the quarter tones and such like this, but she was saying that, these are just standard for me.
Yeah.
Because I play these all the time with ice.
Yeah.
So it's just funny, like even not just the audience, but the musicians are a different breed.
Yeah.
They're used to playing different things. So you have to think about it all as a composer.
Yeah.
It doesn't mean you have to change your style, but I think you need to at least be aware of what's going on, be aware of the tension that you're bringing into the environment when you're bringing those things in, and just to be prepared for it.
Yeah.
So at least for me, that's how the rehearsals went. I knew where the tension points were going to be, but I also knew that, okay, I want these tension points, and I know I know what's going to happen, how to fix them if and when they come.
Yeah.
So, I mean, that's my mentality towards that. I mean, with conceit, I'm a big fan of it, obviously, but I also think that people equate that word conceit, or maybe not the word conceit, but maybe the word accessibility. They think that just means you're writing like tonal music that sounds like pseudo Copland or pseudo Tchaikovsky or something, but I think it has more to do with the word conceit.
Yeah. If someone said my music sounded like pseudo Tchaikovsky, I would take that as a compliment. Or pseudo Copland, I would take that too. I mean, well, yeah. I guess I wasn't meaning conceit as something that like an audience would be clicking into. I think it's, you can think of, again, the communicative aspect of composing as, what are you projecting into the hall? What's being heard? Versus the kind of, behind the scenes. Yeah, the conceit for me is it's an engineering problem, or an engineering issue where I have to like get that working in order for my imagination to be stoked. It really is about sort of finding the thing that allows me to be creative, actually, and whether that then translates into the communicative content of the piece or not, and what people are actually hearing. I guess that's a sort of an interesting question, that, if are people hearing the conceits, or, I mean, with the metronomic aspect of time in Swivel, I think that one's quite like on the nose or on the ear. Like, yeah. That it's like, okay, like clearly they're playing like da, 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 da. Something about time, something about like rigidity of a metronomic beat. But a lot of the time my conceits are very like they're hidden. It's more like Berg or something, you know, like it's all this like hidden kind of like compositional games that are not necessarily sort of again like part of like what the piece is actually communicating in the way that. Yeah, I mean, it's not like a piece like Vodcek is obviously like it's completely made up of these kinds of games that Berg is playing with himself, these rules, these restrictions, and those don't always become things that an audience is aware of. Music theorists are, but I don't know if your average person in the audience is aware of some of the sort of like structural engineering that Berg is doing. But he clearly, I mean, he also said that those things are not for the audience.
Right.
Yeah.
Well, he hides them, but you blur them. Like in your next.
I blur them. Yeah. Okay. That's a good. That's
your
a
next
good,
excerpt.
That's a good transition.
The same song cycle, rather outtake. This is Munch Blur.
Yeah.
You're talking about hiding conceit or hiding musical kind of parameters, for example, in Vodcek. But here you're, for lack of a better term, you're blurring. You're blurring them, so to speak.
Yeah, but here the blur is the conceit, I guess. Yeah, sure. Yeah, I mean, because it's in this photograph, it's well, first of all, it's out of focus. And I mean, this is a relatively early photography also, so there's a kind of imprecision built into it. But it's also, I mean, Munch took this picture. He's in a bathtub. It's actually a reference to the painting, The Death of Marais. Is that Jacques-Louis David? I forget.
I don't know, but I'll put it up on screen for people that are watching.
Wonderful. Yeah. So he's referencing that painting, and is sort of in a bathtub, and it maybe looks like he's been murdered or has killed himself, and it's kind of blurry. And the blur is both, again, it's the blur of early photography, but it's also, I like to think, the blur of the steam from the bathtub. And that's also kind of what Royce Vavrek, the lyricist, is riffing on in that text, that there's this kind of blur that's maybe more like steam on a mirror. Musically, that's a very beautiful image for me, and a lot of my music aspires to steamed mirrors. Steamy. Yeah. Yeah, I mean, it's this kind of una corda world. It's, my music is often quite muted. It's, something like lontano is a direction I have a lot in the music. Like, it's this quality of being slightly out of focus, slightly far away. And so in this song, he gives me this text. I'm just like, okay, wonderful. I can snap into my blurry mode. And then I play with that through. I had a heck of a time coming up with the right notation for this, where the piano's playing these very dense cluster chords, and then slowly sort of like lifting, like note for note, revealing other kinds of harmonies inside of the initial cluster. So you sort of get like blur, and then like it clears and you have like a diatonic chord or something like that.
It's funny because I did when I saw it, I was like, oh my God, I did the same exact thing.
Yeah?
I had a cluster and then I did the release, but I notated it a little different. I can't remember how I did it.
It's hard to, you almost wish, you almost need to put every finger on its own stave, but then it becomes totally unwieldy.
I think I used like ties that tied to just like the notes I wanted to release.
And
then it was like a dominant. I think it was like a dominant seventh chord. We had something kind of similar, triadic. So we did kind of similar.
Okay.
But it was like a completely different context.
Okay.
I mean, yours makes sense because it's the whole thing about like releasing the blur. But as soon as I saw it or heard it, I was like, oh, this is like what I did, but it's like in a completely different context. It's just amazing how you can kind of, I wonder if I saw yours first before I did mine, if I still would have done it.
You got there first. No, I mean, and I did not like invent this idea at all, but.
No, of course not. Yeah. But still, you kind of get that in the back of your head as a composer when someone else does it. Especially someone you know. At least for me, I'm like, oh man, so-and-so did it. I don't want to. It's such a great idea, but I don't want to lift it like completely. You know?
I mean, even there's a piano piece by Schumann. I forget. I mean, it's one of the more famous pieces, but I can't remember the name of it now. But he actually also plays with like there's a chord held, and I think in that one it is like a dominant seventh chord or something, and then every note lifts, and he shows explicitly how to like lift the fingers, and when the finger lifts, like it. Like I think in the Schumann example, like you hear the theme emerge from the notes being lifted, because
the rhythmic,
not the rhythmic. No, it's
like the rhythm matter at all in the lift.
I mean the lift reveals the note above it, and so that in a way that like makes that note sound right, because it's right. So like in lifting it like reveals the next note, and it's a really magical moment. But that is something that I'm terribly interested in. This clusters that like reveal things inside of them.
And it can't be done like you said before. Like your music is interested in that kind of intimate environment. You can't just throw that in like a even like a pro ensemble or something. Or you can't like throw that. You can't really pit that sound against any other sound.
And as we were sort of talking about earlier, it's interesting to think how something like Munch Blur, if I was trying to translate that into an opera aria. Maybe someone's in a bathtub on stage, and that idea gets translated into the orchestra, but like it's so subtle, and it's so spacious and quiet that you would have to find another way of you'd have to like reimagine the idea to translate it to this larger realm where time and sound and size all are functioning quite differently.
I don't think you can even have that at all. I mean, it would probably have to be like something, I can't even think, maybe something with percussion, with pitch percussion.
Almglocken, always Almglocken,
Artificial string high artificial harmonics never hurts, like a temporary piece.
Blow that crotale.
Both Quartet, I think of so many things that we could do instead. This goes into like a discussion about just like opera in general and how contemporary composers, for lack of a better term, they're gravitating towards these operas that are smaller, like shorter, like not like 3 hours, and they're also smaller in size, right? They're not these huge orchestral things that like, I don't know, John Adams was doing back in the 80s with like Nixon in China and things like that, and Philip Glass with Akhenaten and all his big series of operas. Are you like, I mean, I don't know, I'm just thinking out loud. Is your goal at the end of doing all these kind of vocal projects, would you like to get to a point where you're writing something like that, or are you just genuinely more interested in writing these kind of more intimate projects, since these are more closer to your current style? Maybe that's a loaded question.
No, it's a really good question. I mean, if Peter Gelb phoned me up tomorrow and said, write an opera for the Met, I would certainly say yes. I would definitely want to do that. But it would. I would have to do a lot of thinking about how my music and the things that I'm interested in now would translate to that size and that scale. Yeah, and something like the Met, again, like when the Met stages a contemporary piece or commissions a contemporary piece, they're thinking of it as being a large piece because it's a large house. It's a big stage, it's a big orchestra. So, these pieces, like something like Kevin Putt's work, like The Hours, it's a large orchestra. It's not a huge cast, but then there's also a chorus and there's also dancers. Did you see that at the Met?
No, I didn't see that.
Okay,
but I heard about it. I saw some trailers.
Yeah, so like that's what I found strange, but also really interesting about that piece is that on some level it's actually quite an intimate piece. It's really about three women, but then it's the Met, so it's this it's a large piece, and they all had to find a way to sort of scale that up to a stage designed for Aida. Yeah, like Matt O'Coin's work, Eurydice also, it's large opera. I mean, that opera also has like very beautiful intimate moments in it. But yeah, those are large operas for a large stage, for a large orchestra, for a large house. And yeah, I would really have to think about how I would scale up to that. Yeah, I've written orchestra music and I've written opera with chamber scoring, but yeah, I've never written yet a full-length opera at that scale.
With orchestra, yeah, because I know that you write a lot for orchestra. You got
and I did have an opera. This was written with Thompson Highway in 2018 called Chakapesh, which is for orchestra. Two voices and narrator. That piece is, it's 40 minutes long, 30, 40 minutes. So it's in three scenes. So in some ways it still has this kind of chamber feel in a way, because it's not like expansive. It's not several hours long. The opera that I'm writing with Royce Vavrek now, the same lyricist, librettist from the Outtake song cycle, is called The Cremation of Sam McGee, based on the Robert Service poem of the same name. It's currently being developed through Vancouver Opera, and we're going to be workshopping a full-length version of the opera in the spring in Vancouver, but it'll be with piano, and the cast is small. It's 4 men. So again, there's a kind of, the length will be, it'll be maybe 70, 80 minutes, so larger scale than the other works I've talked about. We're still trying to figure out if it'll be, in the end, finally, when it's actually produced, whether it will be orchestra or chamber scoring. But the cast is certainly small. It's just 4 men, and it's really this kind of the setup is 4 men around a campfire, which is, there's nothing more intimate than that. And I don't know if I could imagine that at the Met. You need to find some other way of filling the stage.
Right. Yeah.
Just it could just be snow, maybe.
Well, that's the thing. Like, as composers, we're not really tasked with the visual part of it. Or like, if I back up a little bit more, when you're producing an opera or creating an opera, how much of a say do you, as the composer, have in what's going on? Clearly, it seems like you work with the librettist. That seems to be the first step.
Yeah.
But then beyond that, what are the stages?
In my experience thus far, it's not something that I've had experience, that I've had input in terms of staging. Those are things those are sort of like a directorial team or director or producer that's making those decisions. You have so much control as a composer over time, over the time domain, and that obviously determines so much in terms of the flow and the drama of a piece. I think that is the way that I'm in control of the staging, is that the time domain is something that's being engineered by me, the composer. But then of course you have to give that to a director, and they have to figure out how does this actually work on stage. Yeah, there's this wonderful anecdote. It's by Steve Sondheim, talking about while he was composing, and it was a similar sort of question about when you're composing, how much are you thinking about the staging to come, that'll be down the road. Yeah, and I forget which musical he was talking about, but he was sort of saying that he was trying to imagine the staging while he was writing it, in terms of thinking do I have enough music at this moment for someone to get from this part of the stage to another part of the stage.
Oh, wow. Okay.
And in a way, you're already thinking about the staging in a way, and you're already thinking about the size of the stage. So I think those are things that you do have to be sort of aware of in a way, like how long it takes to get from one place to another and whether you've built in enough time for that to happen. But I think, yeah, for the most part, you just don't know where the thing will eventually be done for real, actually premiered. And even if you get that all figured out, like it's going to move to other places as well. But I like to think that you get to sort of build some of that mise en scène into the music, so that the music becomes the staging. I've now brought up Berg twice. I'm not comparing myself,
but that's major inspiration, obviously, for you.
Yeah, I mean it's weird. I don't think my music sounds anything like Berg. Yeah, I mean I've seen Vavrek live 3 times, twice in like staging, like staged as an opera, and it never actually made an impact on me for all of its fame. And it's kind of a rare, how many 20th century operas are actually part of the canon. It's a 20th century hit,
Really Bluebeard's cast.
Yeah, Bluebeard, yeah. Well, that's the other thing as well.
But that one is really short. That one you have to program like with another.
You have to put it with something else. It's actually it's the same thing about Bluebeard, that I've seen it staged and also was like not quite convinced by it. And then I saw Vavrek done at Carnegie Hall in a just like stage,
like on stage,
like an oratorio basically, like just
a handle kind of thing.
There weren't even costumes. I don't think it really was just like singers standing with just standing and singing, and the orchestra behind. And I also saw at the New York Phil do Bluebeard, and it was similar to that, where it wasn't at the Met. It was it was just done with the singers on stage, and with no staging at all. And for both Bluebeard and for Vavrek, I feel like I finally like got the work and like fell in love with them at those moments when I saw them without staging.
Wow, okay.
And it seemed to me, because it seemed to me that I finally realized that the music was the staging in a way, that the music was already doing the mise en scène, that it was supplying all of the, not only the dramatic information, but everything about like color, atmosphere, mood, just background, even just like, I don't know, the size of like what a room was supposed to be like that, all of that was kind of like built into the score. And it's something that like in Bluebeard, it's like it's all these different rooms, and every room sounds different, right?
Yeah, it's very psychological.
Yeah. Well, yeah. So we're inside someone's head in a way, and that's like what it says in the prologue, right? It says something about like lift like the curtains of your eyelids, and like we're like inside. It's like this like psychodrama, but every room has already been built into the music, and like you don't need to see Judith opened the door and like you see all the gold, because like the gold is in the music at that moment. Like it's like the music is doing the glittering and the shining. And in other moments you open, it's there's a lake in one room. Like that's like the music is already meant to sort of like depict that somehow. So this is all to say that that these works can be staged or not staged, but I think it's a good model for a composer to be thinking about the music. The music is already trying to do some of the staging, I think.
Mm-hmm. Or don't rely so much on what happens after you write the music to kind of tell the story either.
Yeah,
right? because that's like the opposite of like film. It's like, okay, sometimes they do a scene in a film, right?
Yeah.
And the director says, well, the music is going to carry the emotion of this. I don't have to worry about it. But it sounds like to you, it's like, no, I want to make sure the music stands on its own, even without the production part of it. It seems like the opposite situation.
Yeah, and it's a huge thing.
It's hard to do.
To think that you can do that.
Yeah.
It's like, I don't even need staging. It's like the staging is already in the music. Like,
right.
What an arrogant thing to say, and
how
disrespectful to all the amazing directors out there. But again, yeah, it's an aspiration.
Right.
It's
like, doesn't mean it's going to happen every scene. Or
but
even for one scene.
Yeah, but like again, this opera with Royce now, it's like, yeah, I mean, there's like there's a saloon scene, and the saloon sounds like something, and there's snow, and we're outside sometimes, and I'm trying to sort of find, or we're in a car, we're in the cab of a pickup truck, and there's windshield wipers, and it's cramped, and it's steamy because the heat's on. Um,
As one would expect, listening to your stuff.
Yeah, back to the Blur. Yeah, and maybe that also relates to the idea of conceit again, that I'm trying to sort of, I'm looking at the text, I'm thinking of the staging, and then I think like how can my music do something with this situation, with this scenario, with this location? It's world building in a way.
Mm-hmm. No, I wanna jump to something else actually, which is quite opposite of the excerpts that we heard so far, which are kind of like in this, like what you said, distant kind of sound world. This excerpt that you have from Unruly Sun, which is, you described it as what, like a musical, not an opera or a song cycle, but something in like more like a musical theater piece.
Well, you could call it a musical theater piece. You could call it an opera. I think we called it a dramatic song cycle.
Okay.
But it's kind of flexible.
Yeah. So this excerpt is called Fast Backward, which is for tenor, piano, and string quintet, and it's quite funny. Let's listen to it.
Fast forward, past the unconvincing bootlicks of the household cavalry. Fast forward, past the sheep pelt of the stable boy. Fast forward, past the flaccid thwacking of the headmaster's ruler. Over the accessorized S&M, robotic blowjobs, lifeless fucking. All wrong. He feels not even the faintest stirring. Where he once a stirring felt, and says aloud, darling, whatever happened to the singer? He blames his age, he blames the drugs, he blames the lives lost for his vanquished libido, and tries to sleep. But then he recalls
This one piqued my ears immediately, actually, because you quoted, like, I mean, it wasn't in the same key, but you quoted from Schubert Erlkönig, you know, and I said, oh my God, something is about to go down, you know, if this is happening. Because, you know, when you know this, when you quote something that famous, right, it's a big risk, right? But I think you quoted some other things. I can't put my ear on exactly what they were, but once I heard the Erlkönig quotation, I kind of saw the writing on the wall, so to speak. This is going to be like an ironic kind of situation that you're describing here.
So this is from Unruly Sun, which I wrote with librettist Mark Campbell, and that's Kareem Suleiman, tenor, singing in that excerpt. For whom we wrote this part. Unruly Sun is inspired by the journals of English filmmaker Derek Jarman, which he published as a book called Modern Nature, which is his diaries from, I think it's 1989 to 1991. And he's dying of AIDS while he's writing this, and he's living in a fisherman's shack that he bought in Dungeness in Kent, which is, you know, a sort of remote shingle in the UK on the coast, and it's very remote. It's near like a nuclear power plant. It's just like out in the middle of nowhere, and he sort of is building a garden and sort of thinking about I mean, his life ending. He's also thinking about lovers. He's trying to finance his final films. So these are the contents of these journals from these years. That was sort of the starting point of this piece that I wrote with Mark. We don't actually quote anything from any of the diaries. It's all Mark's original text. We're sort of like riffing on or like living within the world of these diaries of Derek Jarman's writings. So Unruly Sun is in some ways it's about someone who's like Derek Jarman, tending a garden, dying of AIDS, thinking about lovers lost, lovers past. Some of the piece is quite dark. Mark made it very clear that the piece overall could not be dark in mood, that it had to have optimism and beauty and humor. It had to have a huge emotional range in order for the whole thing to work, which is something that you also find in Jarman's writings, where, you know, he is dying, he's sick, he's in and out of hospital, but he's also so full of humor and life and in beauty, and he's tending this garden that he's making, and it's a beautiful testament to the human spirit, these diaries. And so that's, Mark was really trying to capture that range of emotion. And so this song is called Fast Backward, and it's about someone giving our protagonist porn tape, like a VHS.
Oh, that's what it is. That's
porn.
What he's watching. Okay. There you go.
Yeah, so he's watching this. And he's watching this porn and being totally unexcited by it, and he's quite bored, and so he's fast forwarding through it and trying to find something that excites him, and finding absolutely nothing. So that's the kind of the general setup of this particular song. I think the Erlkönig quote is, you know, he's watching like there's some like S&M like fetish scene with like a stable boy being whipped by an older man, and something about like the horse and the image,
right? Of course.
And you know, seemed to make me want to make a reference to Erlkönig as a kind of a sly little joke. But yeah, the other quotation that maybe you couldn't quite put your finger on is from Respighi. It's the Pines of Rome.
Oh, okay, like the part where we ended in the excerpt.
Yeah,
basically. Okay.
Yeah. So in Mark's lyric, you know, again, he's like fast forwarding through all this boring porn that's doing nothing for him. But what finally excites him is actually a memory. It's like a memory that he has, and it's not really about the VHS. And he's remembering cruising in Rome at the Villa Borghese, and that's actually the thing that sort of like excites him. And so at that moment, I was trying to think like, this song really like was hard for me to write. My music is not usually funny.
That's what I was going to ask. How do you make, you know, this is something that composers don't really do that often. Usually we explore themes that are dark or even themes that are optimistic, but it's usually humor is not one of these things that I notice many of us doing. And I mean, you did it really well in this particular scene. So
I really struggled with it.
Right?
Yeah,
because you knew the text was supposed to come off as funny, right?
Yes. Yeah, and but I honestly almost didn't do it.
So you wanted to go against it.
I just didn't think I could do it. And you know, Mark gave me this text, and I thought the text was so funny, but I was like, I have no idea. Of all my compositional resources,
right, your toolbox.
I don't know. Yeah, my toolbox.
You got to get another tool from Home Depot or something.
Exactly. Yeah, I did not have any of the right, you know, tools to build this song, and I was like, I don't know, and I was so close to saying no, and was really actually ashamed, because like I had set, you know, every other lyric, and I think there's like 19 lyrics in this cycle, but I got to this one and I was like dreading.
So this was the last one that you wrote?
Not the last one, no, but it was like I had written like
You're putting it off.
Yeah, putting it off. I was avoiding it.
I know how that feels.
I know. I was like, no, I gotta do something with this song. Okay, I'm like, yeah, and then I finally, I like found the entry. I found the way in, and I found like what I thought was like the right tone. Yeah, this thing about memory is you know, so important in music, and that, you know, after all this humor within the song, that it's really like actually like a memory that brings him back to this different place. Like, and it's kind of like the idea of lontano. So I found my way of getting my lontano thing, my like far away thing, because the memory is he's thinking, oh, I was back in Rome and I was cruising at the Villa Borghese. And at that moment, then in my ensemble, we hear the violinist play the theme from the Villa Borghese movement of The Pines of Rome by Respighi. But I write it in a violin, and I say to play it like you're a street busker, basically. So
Right, the little tune that plays near the end of that excerpt.
Which is actually, perversely enough, I think that's like a nursery rhyme tune. I think Verspigi was already quoting something.
Yeah, I mean, that would make sense.
Yeah. So it's like, but it was a way for me to, again, like thinking about like mise en scène, thinking about like location. It was like, okay, so we're here, we're like watching the video, but then we're having like a memory flashback of it, and we're in a different location, and then this violin starts playing this, like a street busker playing like a little Respighi tune, and that's part of his memory. And underneath of that, the music is kind of pulsing, and this chord is slowly building up, and then it kind of ends with a bit of a lighthearted musical equivalent of a.
Well, I mean, also the music is so involved, like it changes a lot from moment to moment. Whereas like the other excerpts we heard don't necessarily do that. It's more like this like big churn, like you take that one conceit and you kind of go as much as you can with it. This doesn't do that, and you even have this part. Where you're right, even in the score Hollywood, you're like doing this, like you're going from, I think you're doing this thing with going to different like chromatic medians. I think like you're doing this kind of mode mixture type of thing with the chords.
Because at that moment
it sounded like a beautiful mind, that part in the middle mind where you're kind of going from 1 to flat 6 to this kind of chord progression.
Yeah.
But you were meant to do that. I mean, right, Hollywood right there.
It's supposed to be kind of like shimmery and a little gaudy. Yeah, because at that moment, again, like Jarman is a filmmaker and he's watching this porn.
Of course, yeah.
And or the character that's kind of Jarman-esque. And he says, like, in a sort of moment of like, I don't know, he's being ironic, and he says, darling, whatever happened to the cinema?
Yeah.
Because he's so unimpressed with this porn movie. And so like, at that moment, again, I was trying to sort of figure out like, okay, whatever happened to the cinema? So I was like imagining this like cinematic, Hollywood chord.
You know what it reminds me of, actually, now that I mean, I didn't realize this, but now that you're talking about it, it's like you took have you heard of the Mickey Mouse technique in film scoring, where you're like literally scoring what you see on screen?
One to one.
Right, so that's what you did here. But you didn't do that, because you didn't do that in any of the other, at least the other excerpts that I heard, it stands out so much more as something different. Whereas when you're watching a Mickey Mouse show or Tom and Jerry, whatever, the whole episode is like that. So it doesn't even like, you're not drawn to it necessarily. That's just part of the language.
Never before have I been compared to James Horner or been told that my music is Mickey Mousey. But I think,
the first for anything.
I know. I really had to, I had to go to new places in this song. Yeah, and I think that's also kind of part of the humor of it. But humor in music is so hard. I think it's so hard to do. Have you ever written anything that's funny? Intentionally funny?
I did a long time ago, but it's not a piece I would have played ever again for Woodwind Quintet. But I kind of
Woodwind Quintet is already funny.
I thought it was kind of cheating when you got a bassoon and a oboe, and no offense, but it's
the joke writes itself.
But
with all due respect to
I did a similar thing to you, actually. I was quoting from past composers. I quoted like the Vivaldi Four Seasons.
Okay.
But I kind of moved it around.
But for wind quintet?
I did it
That is funny.
I was a freshman in college and I didn't know what else to do, so I did that.
No, that is funny.
But people were laughing, actually.
Yeah,
in the audience,
I'm laughing.
So, it was funny, but I never did it again. My music is kind of very serious all the time. So if I had a project like yours, I would have a very tough time. I wouldn't know what to do.
Yeah.
It would be the same situation that you were in.
Yeah. I'm trying to think of like really funny composers.
A funny composer I can think of right now is Matthew Brown. Do you know him?
No.
Yeah, I think he lives in New York, but he did his doctorate, I believe, at Michigan.
Okay.
He finished a while ago, but he has these hilarious pieces. A lot of them are for orchestra or wind band. And he does a great job. He's probably the best composer I've heard, like contemporary composer I've heard that can write humorous music. And he does it on purpose. Matthew Brown, and it's Brown, but with an E at the end, I believe. So he's like around our age.
Yeah.
And he Yeah, no, but he does it on purpose,
Yeah.
and he's done it many times. So he's like, it's like a skill, like what you were saying, the toolbox. I mean, has a wrench in the box. He's got a drill. He's got all the different.
There's a clown nose.
Yeah,
It was like that.
He's got it all. Yeah, and he does it differently in every piece.
Okay.
So,
Yeah. Yeah. I mean, these sound like instrumental pieces. I think that's even harder. I mean, if you're dealing with text,
there's no text.
If you're dealing with text, like you at least have the text to be funny, and then you just have to kind of like support it musically. But yeah, funny instrumental music that's not like PDQ Bach. Like
No, it's not like that at all. But that's definitely, you can tell that's an inspiration for what he's doing. But
okay, it must be in the title at least then, right? Like
the title
Okay.
of course is the language is like completely like contemporary classical language. It's not like PDQ Bach where he's taking, like, it sounds like he's trying to sound like Bach, but not really. I mean, these are like within the language of composers that are writing in the late 20th century, early 21st century.
Yeah.
So I think it's remarkable.
Okay, I'll check it out.
I haven't had him on the show, but
okay,
eventually I will.
you gotta have him. Yeah.
Yeah, but no, I wanted to play, just to finish off, I want to play one more excerpt here that kind of goes back. You were mentioning the garden, like how he tends his garden. This is literally an excerpt about that. So this is from The Unruly Sun, Then as Now.
There in the garden, your childhood garden, you were safe there in your garden, with its tall walls, orderly rows, well-mannered blossoms, balanced sun and shade. You are hidden, you are hidden.
Allium neapolitanum is a pretty bulb related to the onion. Happily, it is not so pungent an odor.
In your garden, weeds were plucked, slugs slaughtered, shoots pruned. Nature was tidy, nature obeyed. With rapture you absorbed every word of beautiful flowers and how to grow them.
We should look upon roses as cheerful, delightful, affectionate companions.
In your garden, father's rages weren't heard, mom's indifference didn't hurt, and the shame you felt at your own desires on an older boy's handlebars, or the fear that you would always be alone disappeared there in your garden.
I feel like you kind of go back to your kind of more intimate style with this one, but it's a good contrast with the other piece that we just heard.
Yeah, and like in this song, our protagonist is he's making a link between his garden now and the garden of his childhood as a place of solace and refuge and wonder. Yeah, so I was thinking a lot about like childhood and a child at the piano. I kind of write this. I'm not sure if it's part of the excerpt, but the piece opens with what kind of sounds like a Schubert impromptu, and it's kind of modeled on one, but it's not Schubert. It's me, or it's me in a Schubert costume. But it sounds kind of like music that like a child would play. Fairly simple, but like beautiful, like the kind of way that Schubert can do that. The combination of those two attributes. That's like one kind of music that runs through the piece, and then this other music comes in that, I don't know, to me when I was writing it felt like a Beatles song somehow. Something about like the tonality and the kind of like the modal shifts in the music, the kind of mixolydian feel seemed Beatles-esque. So like I kind of set up two worlds, this like fake Schubert and then fake Beatles, and then at a certain moment the two were kind of overlaid. So
I actually didn't realize that. So the Beatles, a lot of Beatles stuff is in mixolydian?
Well, just in terms of like having like a flat seven.
Okay, that's what you
flat
mean
seven
by
feel.
that. Yeah,
Yeah.
Not really having the leading tone.
Yeah, that like
feeling.
that
I
flat
see what
seven
you're
feel.
saying.
Yeah,
Okay,
yeah, you find that in a lot of Beatles music. Or just like a lot of like play with like modes and modal mixture. So yeah, something about that. I mean, again, we're sort of like in an A flat world, but there's all these like G flats as well.
Okay.
It seemed, yeah, just while I was kind of like finding my chords at the piano, I suddenly found myself feeling like it was, had the quality of a Beatles song. I mean, a very poor imitation of that.
But when you're making a decision like that, does it have, so like you start off with this kind of like impromptu, and I think I'm going to include that in the excerpt.
Sure, yeah.
That beginning section before the voice comes in. But like when you're thinking about having this kind of like clear melody, right, that you want people to remember, right? Is it directly related to the text at all, or is it just something like, okay, I want to start this with this kind of idea, divorced from the text?
Oh, well, I mean, the text. Yeah, I think that, I mean, the text was giving me lots of clues because, again, is thinking about childhood. And so I was trying to imagine, again, like memory and a child at the piano and what like a young child would be playing and this kind of like Schubert-esque melody. Mark also has something that if you include the opening now, there's a recording of a child actually.
Right, talking over.
Yeah,
it.
talking, yeah. And that child is reading excerpts from a book that Jarman mentions reading as a child called Beautiful Flowers and How to Grow Them. And it's this, beautiful book that like a young gay boy would be very interested in. It's very beautiful. There's these like amazing pictures and descriptions of flowers. And Jarman mentions this book in the diaries. And so it made its way into Unruly Sun as a kind of a reference point to this book that was important to the protagonist as a kind of early like queer association, this beautiful illustrated book about flowers. And so we have within the song, we have this, grown man singing, which is Kareem, but then we also have a child. We found a British child, a real British child, to record these excerpts. So he's just speaking excerpts from this book, Beautiful Flowers and How to Grow Them. That all came together in a very beautiful kind of organic way. Working with Mark and deciding, do we want to include these references? And suddenly the thing just becomes populated with all these beautiful symbols and signs that are pointing to the past and pointing to different places. It becomes a very rich place for me as a composer to be just like dealing with all these different references. And so similarly, I think that the music then begins to sort of play with referentiality and with seeming like it's pointing towards music from elsewhere.
No, it makes sense now, especially when you have the voiceover that the piano lick ties into what the singer does later on. It all goes around really nicely. No, I'm trying to think with this melody here. It's very different than like when you do the Erlkönig or whatever references, the Pines of Rome reference, because it's not a direct thing at all.
No,
but you get the listener to think, oh, is that something I know? But it's not something I know.
Yeah, it's a simulacrum. It's a copy of something for which there is no original. I think that's the Baudrillard definition of simulacrum.
Well, that's a new word I don't know.
Okay.
To be honest with you.
We'll drop a
gotta put the definition in the description.
Yeah. So yeah, but that's exactly what you're describing, where it's like it sounds like a reference, but it isn't. Or I mean it sounds like a quotation, but it isn't. And that's something that I've been playing with for a long time in my music. Think of it as a form of like of costume play in a way, that I'm sort of like putting on the clothes of other composers, or a form of drag even. You know, I've sort of like made that connection before as well. So sometimes it is literal quotation, and other times it's more like an emulation, or it's a kind of a reference to a kind of a style, but it's not actually, you know, lifted from something else.
Yeah, but to have both of those things in the same work, it also kind of creates that blur also, because you're not doing it the same way every single time, which I think makes it more interesting.
Yeah. Do you ever work with quotation or
simulacrum? I do. Yeah. No, I did it in the piano concerto we were talking about earlier. I did the same thing where I wrote a la Tchaikovsky. And I did the Piano Concerto #1 with the big chords. I literally did that.
Okay, no, that's a reference.
yeah. But I don't usually do that. No.
Wow, speaking of humor, was that a funny moment?
It wasn't supposed to be.
Because it sounds funny.
It actually,
because it's so like,
I think it's funny. I don't know if
the Tchaikovsky opening is now like, it's almost like, I think of like Bugs Bunny at the piano playing it. Right? I know. Like it's so overloaded.
Yeah, I know. I don't know. I mean, people would have to hear it. I didn't really twist it actually. I only twisted it rhythmically.
Okay.
I only kind of slowed it down. So there's like a built-in retardando into it. Not like what it does, but actually it's literally major chords.
Yeah,
in
D
that
flat
same
major.
voicing.
Okay, yeah.
But I think I start on E flat. I just kind of go up like that, and the orchestra is doing a completely different thing than what the Tchaikovsky does.
Yeah. Okay.
But
interesting.
I'm not sure if anybody caught it. I like doing that idea. I'm just scared of it doing it in my other work, but I think you do it really well.
Okay. Yeah. Well, thank you.
I appreciate having you on, and good luck with all the other opera stuff.
Thank you.
Or operatic stuff.
Thank you so much. Thanks for having me. Yeah. It's been fun.